Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. And thank you for joining us for the Word Today live stream brought to you by Fairfield Baptist Church. I am Dale Worthy and I serve as the pastor of Fairfield Baptist Church in Auburn, Georgia, and it is our delight in the Lord to have you today. I want to wish all the mothers a joyous and a blessed, happy Mother's Day. And let me ask you to do me one favor, as I always do. Would you please share this broadcast with someone close to you today? Let's share the encouragement of the Word of God and the fellowship of His people with as many people as we can. Also, I want to remind you that in the midst of everything that is going on, COVID-19, unfortunate killings, senseless violence, God is still in control. Let me encourage you also to check on your neighbors, your family, and your friends during times like these. We need to stay connected to one another and to stay connected to the church. And to that end, you can stay connected to our church through our Facebook page, through our website, www.fbcauburnga.com. We'd love to have you engage with us through any of those social media platforms. We also want you, try to urge you to continue in your generous giving if you can. Although we're not in the sanctuary yet, you can still give to the church via Givelify. Search Fairfield Baptist Church, Auburn, Georgia, or by check or money order mailed to Post Office Box 207, Auburn, Georgia, zip code 30011. We know the economy is down right now, but for those of us who are still blessed to have something that God has blessed us with, we want to urge you to keep giving to the mission and the work of God's church so that these things can keep going. Finally, I want to again thank you for staying at home. Your staying at home and sheltering in place and adhering to social distancing guidelines is helping us to bring this contagion under control. And even though the church, as we know it, is spread out, we are still together in our worship of the risen Lord, of the living Lord. And that is something that we all celebrate. In honor of Mother's Day, I want to give a special happy Mother's Day to my wife, Kina, and to all the mothers, not only of our church, but to every mother who may view this broadcast. Let me hasten to bring your attention to our subject today. We want to call your attention to the book of Exodus, chapter number 2, verses 1 through 10. We also want to reference Numbers chapter 26, verse 59, and Hebrews chapter 11, verse number 23. Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 10 reads thusly: Now a man from the family of Levi married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with asphalt and pitch. She placed the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. Then his sister took and stood at a distance in order to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe at the Nile, while her servant girls walked along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, sent her slave girl, took it, opened it, and saw him, the child, and there he was, a little boy crying. She felt sorry for him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew boys." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Should I go and call a Hebrew woman who is nursing to nurse the boy for you?" "Go," Pharaoh's daughter told her. So the girl went and called the boy's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse him for me, and I will pay you your wages." So the woman took the boy and nursed him. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." I want to try and preach from this idea what it takes to be a mother. What it takes to be a mother. I don't know why, but it seems that when Mother's Day comes around every year, I can't seem to let it pass without preaching a Mother's Day sermon. I'm more likely to let Father's Day pass without a message specifically for fathers, which doesn't make sense when you think about the fact that I am a father. Maybe because I believe Mother's Day is special, and because I think mothers are some of the most underappreciated people in all the world. Mother's Day, I'd like to remind everyone, be good to your mothers and appreciate them even more. And if you're fortunate enough to have your mother with you living on this side of eternity, you are indeed blessed. Today's message is about a mother who had to make some hard choices for the welfare of her child, for the welfare of her son. Being a mother or a father isn't easy, nor is it for the faint of heart. It requires that we make some tough decisions that are sometimes risky, sometimes heart-wrenching, and always require faith. I'd like for us to reflect on the story of a woman who is mentioned only a few times in Scripture. Yet, despite her low profile, she provides a finely drawn portrait of a woman of faith and a woman with faith. In fact, she even made it into the Hall of Fame of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. Her name, according to Numbers 26 and 59, is Jochebed. She was Moses' mother. The nation of Israel had been in Egypt for almost 400 years. They grew and prospered there, but before long, they became a threat to the reigning Pharaoh. And so the Pharaoh forced them into slavery. By the sweat of their brows, cities were built. The Pharaoh hoped to break their backs, but they continued to grow and to prosper. So he turned up the heat on them. He commanded the Hebrew wives and the Hebrew midwives to murder the newborn sons of Hebrew women as they were giving birth. When he discovered that he couldn't rely on the midwives because they feared God more than they feared him, he tried yet another approach. He told his people to stay on the lookout for Hebrew babies and Hebrew baby boys in particular. And if they saw one, they were to throw him in the Nile and to watch him drown. What a picture. What an atrocity. It was during this reign of terror that Jochebed became pregnant with her third child. She didn't have to worry about her older children, Aaron and Miriam, but the child in her womb would be fair game for any patriotic Egyptian in a bad mood. It sounds so much like the unfortunate incidences that we've been experiencing here recently. Mothers losing their children, and it doesn't have to be newborn babies. They can be babies jogging, minding their own business, hunted down like animals. Can you imagine living with such fear? When I think of the times in which Jochebed was called to be a mother, I think about some mothers today. I think about the mother of Ahmaud Arbery. Think about mothers in parts of Africa who face the real prospect of having their children taken away and trained as soldiers. These are challenging days to be a mother in this country and in this world. Our people in particular have for over 400 years lived with the threat of someone killing our babies, taking our babies. And there are still forces at work that threaten our children even now. And even to add to those difficulties, our children, even within our own homes, might drown in a river of violence and promiscuity that are pouring out of every television set every day. They can be drawn into a sea of confusion as the lines between right and wrong every day seem more and more blurred in our society. They can be drawn into a competitive culture that rewards performance over character. Every conscientious parent knows how dangerous it is to grow up in this world. In a dangerous world, and in that dangerous world in which she found herself, Jochebed stands out because she did what she could to save her child. Then when she could do no more, she depended totally on the faithfulness of our God. And for that reason, she is a model of faith. 3 points, and I'll leave you alone. First of all, Jochebed's faith was courageous. Listen to the writer of Hebrews and listen to what he says about Jochebed. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Though the king said all the male Hebrew babies had to be thrown into the Nile, Jochebed and her husband disobeyed the king and hid Moses for 3 months. That takes courage, y'all. Imagine how hard it probably was to hide an infant child. I remember when our daughter was born, we were a whole lot younger and a whole lot less wise than we are now. Didn't quite know what to do with her at first as first-time parents. And I remember how she caused so much angst to us as she came into the world via emergency C-section. And I remember her loving to make noise even back then. We couldn't have hid her if we tried because she made way too much noise. But somehow Jochebed succeeded in hiding Moses. Too many times we often think of faith as something passive. This whole idea of always letting go and letting God. But sometimes real faith is an active thing. Faith sometimes calls for us to do risky things. I think the mothers who've been unable to conceive but have seen that as an opportunity to adopt children who might otherwise have spent their lives in an orphanage or in state custody are courageous. That takes courageous faith. That is a courageous act of faith. I think of mothers who are married to unbelieving husbands, but sometimes defy their husbands in order to expose their children to the truth of God's word. I think mothers who stand up to a teenage son or a teenage daughter saying no to something when all the other mothers say yes because they're right. I think that takes courage. What gives these mothers the courage to act in such a way? It's that they fear God more than they fear man. They want to please God more than they want to please family and friends or their children or even their spouses. And they trust God. They trust that as they're obedient to what He's calling them to do in the face of threatening circumstances, that He'll take care of them and that He'll take care of their child. Not only did Jochebed have a courageous faith, but she also had a sensible faith. After 3 months of hiding her baby, she saw the handwriting on the wall. She made a little wicker basket, if you will, and covered it with tar and pitch to make it float, and put it among the reeds on the bank of the Nile River. It's interesting that the word used here for basket is the same word used for Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark was covered with tar and pitch just like this one. Both Noah and Moses were placed in their respective ark, which is not a very safe environment because the occupants of an ark are at the mercy of the elements. The Nile River, if you remember, was known for crocodiles. And at 3 months old, Moses was completely helpless in a river filled with crocodiles. But I want you to notice that Jochebed was not careless about this, but she was rather sensible about it. She didn't send him floating down the river. She placed him among the reeds along the banks of the Nile. This was a place where women would congregate. She also didn't put him in the Nile and wave bye-bye saying, "Have a nice life, Moses. Maybe I'll see you again someday." She had Moses' older sister standing in the distance to find out what would happen to him. And if Jochebed herself had stood among the reeds watching and waiting, it would have been an obvious sign who she was. But Moses' sister, brothers and sisters, made a good spy. When Moses was discovered in the Nile, his sister offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse him, and a plan began to fall in place. You see, Jochebed was clever. She was sensible in her planning, and part of being sensible is knowing how to improvise on the spot. Women are gifted with such improvisation, and we are blessed because of it. There are mothers who have chosen to give up their children for adoption simply because it was the best thing for that child. And we bless God for them today. For some women, that is a decision that requires an enormous faith and foresight and love. And I also think of mothers who would love to be able to spend more time with their children, but finances won't allow it. And they find ways to make things work out for the best for their kids. They find a way to work around the obstacles. They find that good and godly relative. They find a way to work from home. They find that grandmother or that family member to provide care for their child, or They work staggered shifts with their husbands, so they're always looking out for the good of that child. Third and finally, Jochebed was courageous, she was sensible, and that courageous and sensible faith was soon rewarded by God. As Moses floated along the banks of the Nile River, the daughter of Pharaoh arrived with her maidens. Text says that she saw the basket, had it brought to her. She opened it and saw the child crying. She had pity on him because he was a Hebrew and could just as well have been dead. It was standard procedure for a wealthy woman to hire a nurse to feed a child until it was weaned, and that nurse would essentially become the legal guardian for that child during those years. And so at just the right time, Moses' sister moved in, made an offer for help to fulfill that very custom. She then went to find her mother, who not only got to raise her son, but also got paid to do the work. Brothers and sisters, surely you can see God's hand in all of this. The mother did what she could, but she couldn't do it all on her own. Pharaoh's chosen instrument of death, the Nile River, became the instrument through which Moses ended up being saved. His mother even followed Pharaoh's orders in placing him there. A member of Pharaoh's family comes along to the river at just the right time, rescued the future deliverer of God's people, who also seemed to know by the text just when to cry out, even as a child. Baby was reunited with his mother, who then was able to raise her child during the formative years, teaching him about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then Jochebed released him to Pharaoh's daughter after he had been weaned. Moses spent his youth in Pharaoh's court, where he learned law and rhetoric, mathematics, hieroglyphics, philosophy, and even the art of war. And then Moses led 2 million people through a desert, putting all that he had learned in Pharaoh's court and at his mother's knee to work. I wonder if you noticed that God is never mentioned once in the passage, and still we know that God was still at work. There are things that mothers can do, but ultimately they have to leave things in God's hands. And that's the hardest thing, isn't it? Letting go. Mother's love never changes, but parenthood is a constant process of letting go, letting your child make mistakes, letting your teenager learn some things the hard way, letting your adult child follow God's call, even if that means that he or she will live 1,000 miles away. Mothers, take heart and know that God will use your courageous, sensible faith to accomplish his purposes. Know that he is always working behind the scenes to accomplish his purpose in your children's lives. He will use you, but it's not all up to you. One of the interesting things about this passage is the prominent role women with motherly instincts play in the story. Jochebed saw that Moses was beautiful. Pharaoh's daughter saw the basket, saw the child crying and had pity on him. Moses' sister stood in the wings to know or to notice what would happen and when to act. All of this foreshadows what God would soon do for his people. Later in chapter 2, it's God who looks upon his people who are suffering. We're told in verse 25 that God saw, same word, the sons of Israel, and God took notice, same word, of them. So you could say it's the motherly instinct of God which caused him to move forward to save his people. And it was God's motherly instincts to see us as worthy of delivering from our utterly helpful and sinful state through the death, burial, and resurrection of his own Son, Jesus Christ. Mothers, I pray that you always have a courageous and a sensible faith, and that you will instill that same faith in your children. It is my prayer that God blesses you and keeps you on this Mother's Day and always. Until next time, God bless you, and I bid you peace.
Strong, caring, loving, passionate person, and is just the best person that you could ever meet. She's the best person ever, and I love her very dearly. And I want to say Happy Mother's Day to my mom.
Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.